months after that, I say that I broke my silence in 3 stages. Stage one was to my girlfriend at the time, to one person. The second time was to a small group of people, like 5, 6, 7 people at this sort of mastermind retreat thing that I went to. And then driving home, I then recorded myself and did a video of me breaking my silence and put it onto social media for the world to see. And that was crazy. And the video went viral.
Awe Genge, this is Mental Matters, hosted by Asagot Toto. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Mental Matters. I'm your host, Asagot Toto, and before we dive into today's incredible conversation, I have a small favor to ask. If you enjoy what you hear today, please take a moment to rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but also helps others discover the valuable insights we share every week. And if you find today's episode particularly inspiring or insightful, don't forget to share it with your friends, family, or anyone you think could benefit from it. Thank you for your support. It truly means the world to us. Now, let's get back into our conversation. Firstly, I just want to say thanks so much for actually having this conversation with me. And I feel like it's quite an important conversation, especially now. I'm not quite sure you have seen the series on Netflix, Adolescence, which is a new series. So, and I feel like it really resonates with our conversation today, because in some sense, I believe that especially when it comes to young boys, when actually they come across trauma, and in some sense that they find it difficult to talk about it to their parents, and by any means to go on social media to find inspiration, to find people, end up coming across people that actually have the different perception when it comes to trauma, and they use that to, I would say that to their advantage of, for example, what happened to this series. So hopefully about to get into that type of approach of how can young boys be able to find good role models, not role models that will exploit them, not role models that will actually distill their values and actually disregard other people and find it that I don't know, treat people badly, because I feel like there's a lot of bad energy when it comes to negativity, and also there's huge rise of that negative energy between men and women. So Perry, thank you so much for being here, and welcome to Mental Matters. Really appreciate it.
Good man. Thank you so much.
Yeah. To kick things off, you are someone that is really big on breaking the stigma. To your experience of doing this, what has been one of the things that actually make people not talk about mental health, especially boys? And
Yeah. I mean, if I look back at why I never spoke about it, that was because I was told not to speak about it. And I think that's the main thing. I think that for people who have been through something, especially as a child, they're either told that they can't say anything, or for some others, they aren't told specifically that they can't speak, but the parents or the guardians, the energy that they carry, so it's like you're either telling the kids specifically not to speak out, or you're not making them feel comfortable enough to speak out, which is kind of you telling them that they can't speak anyway. You know, so my dad said to me, you're not going to tell anyone. You're going to keep this at home. Don't tell your mother. Don't go to school and tell your friends. Don't speak about it. So I was told specifically, don't speak. And I was scared of my dad. So I never spoke out, you know?
that is very unfortunate. And being able to be raised by parents that still have those mentality back then of actually saying that they're saving, I would say, a certain image because
Mm.
if you say such thing, your family will be viewed as this way. And it's something that it's funny. I came across at a Instagram reel where this guy was saying that some parents rather protect their ego than their children's. And that was hit deep because in some sense, what's the point of having a child if you actually gonna have your own? I would say that you rather protect your ego more than the specific child. And it is quite something that is interesting. And I believe that is the result of underreporting when it comes to sexual abuse. Whereas you must have that muscular energy, you must actually resonate with stoicism. And I'm someone that really big on actually stoicism, but at the same time, it has very, I would say that bad bad effects or disadvantages, because in some sense that some people interpret it in a different way. Whereas I want to be stoic, one would say I want to be stoic and end up actually carrying things deep inside of, and when they burst out, it's either they cause violence or actually it comes to in terms of one committing suicide. One of the things that I actually saw, and it's a conversation that I always want to speak about when it comes to men, when it comes to trauma. So, in going to your story, how did you actually end up actually telling your story? What actually initially triggered you of saying that I'm going to do this?
Well, connecting to what you were just mentioning there about stoicism and masculinity and ego. So I think there's lots of parents out there, which I'll tell you in a second about my dad, where, there's families out there as ego. They're putting their own ego first before kids, before their own kids. I think in this world that we're talking about now, mental health, uh, pedophilia,
Mm,
things of that nature, abuse, that a lot of people adopt this black and white thinking. It is wrong.
mm, mm,
Some people, they should be put, we should bring the death penalty, they should be killed, like that type of thing. And I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong. I'm saying that's very black or white.
mm,
And I think that for me personally, it was how I was able to move on, how I was able to find forgiveness, all this sort of stuff was, rather than thinking black and white, was how could I try to find a level of understanding from the other side of the fence? How could I put myself in the shoes of my dad, who told me to stay
mm,
quiet? Why did he tell me to stay quiet? This sort of leading with curiosity. And because all of that is what then allowed me to find out. So, for example, back to your question, why did I speak out? How did I able to come to the place where I was able to share my truth? That was because what initially sort of laid the foundation for this was June 1st, 2017, my dad died suddenly from a heart attack.
mm,
And he was 48 years old. And about a few months after that, I saw a video by Lewis Howes, who brought out his book called Mask of Masculinity.
mm,
And he was the host asked him why did he write a book about masks and men wearing masks, and he said because he was raped when he was a child, and he grew up wearing these different masks in order to fit in order to try not to be defeated by his demons, to run away. And when he said that, that made me stop and think about the masks that I had been wearing all of those years. So he said it in a way that made me think, that made me reflect. And then it was that evening that I broke my silence and told my girlfriend at the time, and I told her what I went through. And then a few months after that, I say that I broke my silence in three stages. Stage one was to my girlfriend at the time, so to one person. The second time was to a small group of people, like 5, 6, 7 people at this sort of mastermind retreat thing
mm,
that I went
mm,
to. And then driving home, I then recorded myself and did a video of me breaking my silence and put it onto social media for the world to see.
mm,
And that was crazy. And uh, the video went viral, and it was because loads of people reached out to me, but then I remember the first person that reached out to me was a man in America. And he said to me, "Thank you for speaking out because I've been through something similar and you're helping me not feel alone with this." It was something along those lines. But that made me realize, I shared my story for me because I needed to get it out of me. And now all of a sudden, the universe, the world has just showed me, Perry, your story can be for other people too.
Mm,
Right.
mm,
And coming back to like some of the things you mentioned before, my family watched that video and my auntie told me that my dad was also abused too as a child growing up by the same man that abused me. So then it made me realize that my dad had lived his whole life living in silence. The reason why he told me not to speak out was because he was living in silence. So if I was to speak out about my story, I'll be forcing him to confront his own story and not just confront his own truth of being abused, which he spent his whole life running away from. He was an alcoholic, right? So he went down that self-sabotaging road. So not only that, but it also would force him to confront probably an aspect of that he failed as a father. He failed to protect his son. So there's a lot of, it's not black and white, right? This is what I mentioned before. There's a lot of so many different angles to this. And but that's why I do what I do now, because as soon as I found out that my dad, my dad didn't commit suicide, but I don't feel like he was far off of it because he drank
mm,
himself to an early grave. He was 48, heart attack, high blood pressure. And I'm like, how many other people out there are on a similar path to my dad? How many men are out there like me and you who have been through something in life and are struggling living in silence, and that's why I do what I do now.
Very interesting when we spoke, you spoke about being curious, being actually putting yourself in his shoes and seeing that the reason why he actually said to you that you shouldn't tell anyone. And and I agree with you when it comes to people seeing things black and white. Is not just that. Being able to look in a different perspective and say, oh flip, now you realize that the reason why he said that. And again, one of the things that you realized, you said that he was an alcoholic. I feel like that's the one of the easiest forms of coping when it comes to alcohol. We aren't able to actually talk about it and we aren't able to think about it because our mind is not fixated to that thing. And who knows, maybe when you actually first mentioned it to him, he actually had bad flash of what happened to him. And it's something that I've seen and it's something that we trying to hide it, but at the same time, we accept it. Actually we accept it and not realize that at some point we when we accept, I would say, how can I put this, when we are told that not to talk about it, and as someone that is older than you, especially your father, you definitely won't talk about it. It's definitely at school. And some says that you must create, to me, you must create that bond of having the father with your father. And when you say, when he says that, no, don't talk about it, you listen to him because you love him, you trust him, and he will never say something that would hurt you and something that will derail you from with your bond. It's quite interesting. So how did you deal with his death in terms of grief, and imagine being dealing with this also?
Mm. Uh, for a period of time, it was interesting because I remember before my dad passed away, I think it primarily comes down to that I think a lot about so many different things, random things. And before he passed away, I think like I wonder what it'd be like if like someone is, there was no one closer to me than my dad. Like, what would it be like if my dad passed away? And I was like,
Mm,
I would have no idea how it'd even be. Like, we see it in the films, right? And we see how one is supposed to be if they lose a parent, right? They're crying, grieving for God knows how long. But when my dad passed away, I, it was a very surreal. The best way I can put it was that it felt like my dad was still alive. but he had gone somewhere. You know, like it was almost like the part of grief where it's like in denial, like my dad ain't dead, you know, and it was like that for ages, for ages, and part of me still thinks he's out there on a beach sipping margaritas, right? And and it was, I must admit, how I how I responded to his death even today still fascinates me. Uh, but what I will say is that I definitely spent some time. I remember going on to a podcast once, and this was probably a year after his passing. And this guy on the podcast, he asked me a question. I never thought about it before. So I kind of mentioned it earlier. He said, "So your dad knew what type of man he was, his stepdad, my step granddad." I said, "Yeah." He says, "So why would he ever let you around the house? Why would he allow you to go around the house with someone that he knows is a pedophile? Why would he do that?" And I remember it just sort of like hit me. And for a period of time, there was anger in me because I'm like, well, yeah, that's true. Why? And then there was part of that grief, which was the anger, and it was the bitterness, and then it was kind of like a fuck you, dad. Why did you do that? Why, and I stayed in that. No, it wasn't for too long, but I did stay in that chapter for a period of time. And then I revisited what I mentioned to you earlier. It's not black and white. It's not, why did you do this, dad? We know it's wrong. So who we're preaching to, like, we know it's wrong. So I don't need to hammer on the fact that it was wrong, because chances are, if I'm hammering on to the fact that it was wrong, then I got some anger attached to that. And the only person that's damaging is me. My dad's dead. It's not damaging him, you know? So it's just damaging me. So I thought, okay, well, lead with curiosity. Why did he maybe do that? Probably because he was so far in denial about his own truth that if he stopped me from going around there, then that means that he would have to confront the reality of what he went through and the reality of what type of man he was. But he didn't want to face his story. So, so many different aspects to it. But now I feel like my purpose is keeping my dad's name, keeping his voice and his story alive, and knowing that he didn't die in vain, by helping other people that are going down a similar path to still be alive and watch their grandkids, and not have a heart attack.
It's quite interesting because I'm just thinking, how did you come to that? I would say that mindset of actually looking things that are not black and white. Definitely, you went actually not overnight to just decide, nah, I'm gonna look at these things different perspective. How did you come to that conclusion? Because it's not something that it's easy, especially when it comes to anger. Anger can take over your life, and you realize, oh, flip, I don't love this person anymore, and you neglect that part of love. So how did you come to that stage of, in a way of seeking, in terms of forgiving him?
Yeah, that's so true. Great question. I don't feel like I have a concrete answer to that. I feel like I have more of an answer of a journey. And when I was 19, I stepped into business, like online business, which then meant I stepped into self-development, self-help. So I started, reading loads of books, and I'm 30 now. My dad passed away when I was 20. I think I was 22. So for about 3 years, I'd been in self-improvement and self-help, like very, very much. I just jumped straight into it. And I think it's an accumulation of reading the right books, being around the right people. I had a mentor at the time that really, really helped me. So I was reading the right books. I had a mentor like my mentor back then was definitely the person that made me start reading books. And he made me to start thinking outside the box, like, but why? He was definitely a but why person. And he didn't say to me, well, lead with curiosity with your dad and your step granddad. I got to that on my own, but he was definitely the person that planted the seed into here. Like, there's always another side to something. Like, it might be worth just being curious about it. So I think it's more so just an accumulation of different things compounding over a period of time that allow me to be the person that can visit it like that.
And you spoke about self-development, and it's something that one thing that I've seen is the fact that as someone that is very big when it comes to stigma, and you want to break the stigma around mental health. So, in some sense, that when we are in that road of self-development, I believe that we became we become we start being stuck of actually be obsessed about self-development and not want to be part of the bigger change of actually saying that no, I've actually found myself now. Let me allow other people, let me help other people. And especially in some sense, women, because I was actually having a conversation, actually not having a conversation, I was listening to an episode by Chris Williamson, and he had India, who's the I forgot the woman that she interviewed, and they spoke about the culture of therapy and religion. That more men are leaned into religion, and more women are leaned to in terms of therapy culture. So my point is the fact that, in some sense, that people think that when they don't help people, they actually, in a way, don't take care of themselves. And being someone that has a platform that helps people deal with, actually help survivors of sexual assault. How did you, firstly, before okay, how did you find in a way of trying to actually have that dedication in your heart that I'm willing to help these people and I'm willing to be that person? And my second point is, I'm not quite sure which one you're gonna answer, but have you forgiven your grandpa, your granddad?
I have, yeah, I have forgiven.
Mm.
Yeah, I and for anyone listening, I'm not saying that you need to find forgiveness. I don't say to people you have to or you don't have to because there's too many complexities and what worked for me might not work for you. So I'll never say that you have to find forgiveness. But for me, I found forgiveness, yes. Uh, and here's the thing: I found forgiveness the moment I understood his story because I found out that my step granddad was raised in a Catholic school in Ireland where he was abused by the priests at that school, right? Part of systemic abuse. And his, like, where he was raised in Cork in Ireland and his school that he was in was part of the case. I don't know if you've seen the film Spotlight, brilliant film. And it's all about the Catholic Church and the cover-ups of abuse in Boston in America. And then they realized it was global, it was worldwide. And fantastic film. And so my dad actually told me to watch that when he was alive, and he sort of gave me a hint that my
Mm.
granddad had a story, but my dad would never sort of talk about it. But I then met up with members of his family way after I published my book, and they told me that he abused them too in his family, blood family, and they told me about the school that he went to and the abuse that happened there. And but so I found out about his story, and listen, it doesn't mean, oh, well, of course he abused us then because he was abused too. My dad was abused, he didn't abuse me. So abuse
Mm.
doesn't necessarily go through silence goes through the generations, right?
Yes.
Silence does. Um, but abuse doesn't necessarily mean it needs to go through the generations. However, what I'm saying is he was abused, he didn't get the help, and he went on to live a life where he inflicted that pain onto other people that was inflicted onto him. And it was just more of a, okay, I see his story, I see the picture, then that allowed me to find forgiveness and that allowed me to move forward. So that's the answer to the second question. The first question was, the best way I can say is I never one day decided, right, I'm going to help people with this. It was more so, I kind of feel like it was, I don't know, the universe just came knocking on my door and said, Perry, you need to do this right now. And I'm like, and they were like, don't read into it. Don't think too much about the big picture. Just do this. As in, Perry, just put your story on TikTok. And this was back in the days when it just went over to TikTok. It was brand new. And I just put my story on there and it went viral and it completely blew up. Loads of people, hundreds of people reaching out to me. And then it was just like one thing at a time. Then the next thing was, Perry, write a book. And I'm like, I don't know how to write a book. And like, just do it. You'll figure it out. And then it was just that. And then eventually it got to a stage in my life where so much has happened. I'm like, oh, this is what I'm doing now. Right? This is what, I'm helping people, and here's the purpose. And that's, one person asked me to help them write a book, and that was 2.5, 3 years ago. And that's what I do now and how I help people.
Mm, mm, mm. And speaking in terms of TikTok, and you really spoke about surrounding yourself with the right people of actually sometimes understood you. And I feel like that's really, really hard these days, especially for when it comes to the rise of social media. And people, as I mentioned earlier, and people like Andrew Tate of saying that in a way of work, like those philosophies, Stoicism, as also mentioned earlier, Stoicism that actually downgrades other people, especially women, and actually looking at the fact that of flip. And also people seeing that when someone is raped, and especially when you tell your story, if someone was sexually assaulted, and they will say that start calling you names, whereas you are gay and things like that. How would you advise someone that has, I would say that has experienced sexual assault, and they haven't told their story because they are scared, as your father, as before you, were scared of actually telling you how it felt. And definitely too, I believe that some fathers out there actually feel the same way of actually saying that they don't want to actually tell their children because they don't want their children to be ruined by this thing.
Hmm. I think that for people living in, so are you, just so I'm 100% clear on the question, it's more so about someone who's living in silence, but they're having fears over whether they should break it and how they should break it.
Yes, that's my question.
Yeah. Yeah. So the best thing that I can say on this is that back in the day when I broke my silence, I broke it to my girlfriend at the time. And she luckily welcomed my truth with open arms. Right? She loved me in that moment, and she made me feel like it was, it's all okay. And that's great. But I say the key word luckily there. And I tell people, don't do what I done. Okay? Because how she reacted in that moment was out of my control. And because I'd lived in silence for so long, and the first time that I broke my silence was to her, you best believe that all I wanted was validation. I needed her to believe me. I had so much on the line, right, on her response. Now, if we do this angle, if she would have rejected me and said, I don't believe you, or why did it take you so long to tell me? And or she in her head was thinking, holy shit, okay, I need to try and know how to respond to this. Obviously, thank you for telling me, Perry, in her head, but I need to know how. So all of that moment of her thinking, for me, that's a long bit of silence. And I could read into that. And in my head, she's thinking, oh, what a weirdo. Why, and just negativity. The point is that she welcomed me with open arms, but there was so much opportunity for her not to give me the response that I needed. And if that is the case, which it is for so many people out there, then I would have associated my truth that I've shared with her with rejection. So then it's like, well, would I ever share my story again if the one person that's closest to me gave me that response? No, I'll never share my story again. So, and I'm not saying for anyone listening that's going to happen. Well, what I am saying is we need to stack the odds in your favor. So, for example, instead of telling your partner on step number one being the first time you break your silence, share your story with your partner or a close person, whoever that is to you, on step number 18. And the first 17 times, break the silence to yourself in as many different ways as you can. Whether that's writing a poem, doing a song, choreographing a dance piece, like whatever it is, confront your truth 17 different times Because what will happen is every single time that you do that, you will start to stand within a position of power and you will start to slowly transition away from pain and more so into purpose. So then it's like, well, on step number 18, when you're telling someone, you're telling that partner of yours, you want them to believe you. Yes,
mm,
of course you
mm,
do.
mm, mm,
However, if they don't for whatever reason, it's not going to send you back living into silence for the rest of your life because you know your truth. You believe you validate you. And that's what happens.
mm,
That's what
mm.
happens, you know?
Oh, flip. Actually get you in terms of that because in some sense, when you decide, okay, I'm going to tell her without actually validating your own feelings
Mhm.
and actually going to someone for validation, and when they reject it, you or for example that long pause, it says a lot to especially for someone, to someone that in your head you hope that you know this person will accept you the way you are because they love you. And when it comes to such conversations, people have different views, people have different opinions towards them. And when you start saying these things, and definitely they will be shocked of them. And I believe in their heads, they're asking themselves, why are you telling me this? How
Mm.
can I actually recover from what you have told me? And it goes to something that I feel like is something I once saw on Instagram, whereas it speaks about people from Japan, I believe so. I'm not quite sure. Whereas some restaurants, in some sense, they don't serve black people because of how they don't know how to react to them because they are not used to the skin color of what do you say, things like that. So it's quite. I feel like still on the topic of mental health is the same thing, and especially when it comes to actually let's make an example. If you're told your girlfriend and her also have been through sexual assault and being afraid to talk about it. Yeah, I understand that most women actually are vocal when it comes to sexual assault compared to men because we have our dignity, we have our ego to protect, whereas that shouldn't be the case. And you start telling her about your experience with sexual assault, and they are triggered and becomes an environment that no one does is unable to recover from because you've told her and she have told you you don't have any specific solution towards that. And it's quite very interesting, and something that I want to dive into as we nearing to our conversation is the rise of online therapy. And actually online therapy in the sense of not attending a therapy session rather than finding solution online, which is from influencers. How you feel about that? What's your take on that?
I think that the more opportunities there are out there to help people find healing, the better. I
Mm,
think there will be the more opportunities of one thing in a good way means that there's more opportunities for it to do bad for people. That's just how it is. That's social media. But like for me, I never got a therapist, so I can't sit here and say that
mm,
uh, online influencers and coaches and self improvement should be or shouldn't be favored more. For me, I found for me personally, I never quote unquote went on a healing journey. I don't identify with healing. For me personally, I identify more so with who's the Perry Power that I want to be and
mm,
let me become that person, and healing will happen naturally as a byproduct of me pursuing the greater version of myself. That's just naturally the path that I went on. Now, every single one of my clients inside of Powerful Books are on the healing journey. They identify with healing. Most of them have therapists or did have therapists. So, and I tell everyone that joins our program, get a therapist because you don't know how you're going to react when you're writing your story. You don't know what traumas are going
mm,
to be
mm,
unreal to you.
mm, mm,
Uh, but what I will say is that the issue that can arise when you take online courses and things of that nature is that it is built for a mass amount of people. Whereas what a lot of people need, if they haven't had help before, is someone that can tailor an approach specifically to them, to their personality, to their story, to their experience. So that's the only thing that, in an ideal world, if someone's listening, get a therapist and also take that course or follow that influencer or whatever it is at the same time. So you got the best of both worlds. Because if you follow that influencer who has a training program, they've catered it for for everyone. So that's what I would suggest.
Because I've just remembered, whilst you were speaking about healing, when you spoke about therapy, you never got the therapy. And I remember myself when I went through my own trauma and realized in some sense that okay, what kind of outlet would I choose for, I would say, for recovering or coping mechanism. So I started writing poetry and released my book. And in all honesty, it wasn't, I actually got what you had in terms of write a book. Don't think about it, just write a book. I wrote a poetry book and didn't even think twice of releasing it. I released it. And oh, and it received a lot of good positive feedback. And in some sense that people might think that back then poetry was seen as just something that would make people happy, things like that. So they didn't see it as something that I naturally felt, something that deep within me. So after poetry, realized, oh flip, I need to tell my story, and didn't know an outlet to continue my story. So I started this podcast. 5 years, 2020. And I feel like that isolation of COVID-19 really helped me in terms of finding myself, of actually giving me the strength of talking about my story. So I spoke about my story, and in some sense, I asked myself this question: which outlet is better for me? Writing a book or talking on a podcast? And I realized that in some sense, when when you start being exposed to different people, different stories, you start disregarding your own feelings. You start to disregarding your own story of saying, "Oh, Philip, that person has more struggles than me, and I'm complaining for this thing," not realizing that no, just because this person has went this, that that doesn't make you disregard your own, because what you felt has been tough. What you have felt has, in some sense, taken a piece of you, has destroyed you a little bit. And who knows that what that person goes through, you could survive it. And what you go through, that person could survive it. And that really changed my whole landscape of how I see things. Speaking about different perspective, looking at not black and white, but in different way. And I just finished, actually it was last year, finished editing, writing the book, another poetry book, and haven't decided the date that I'm gonna release it. So the one of the people that was actually my one editor actually asked me, was quite surprised that I was very vocal when it came to that book, and was surprised why am I so vulnerable, so much vulnerable on that book. And I feel like people, when they see especially a novel or a poetry book, they see it as a piece of art, as whereas the person behind the book was writing in a sense of actually telling that story, compared to a self-help book. To to a self-help book, it's quite easier to actually recognize, oh flip, this person has went through this. It's quite rare when you're writing a novel or a poet of saying that no, this person is just using creative arts, creative writing. It's something that I saw and realized, oh flip, that is the distinction between the two.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. But when we can use a written word to be vulnerable, and we can use a podcast to be vulnerable, that's what allows us to connect other people and give them permission to do the same thing.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Perry, for being here. Really appreciated your time and really enjoyed the conversation. It's something that I've been trying to actually get guests in terms of speaking about the conversation, but it's quite hard, especially for men, because more people that speak up of such conversation are women, and it's something that they are vocal about. But when it comes to men, it's quite rare, and some men find it difficult to actually listen to a man rather than a man. So again, thanks so much for the work that you're doing, and thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate you.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.